Right, it's time to reassemble the motor. This motor here is actually out of my original 1950 Consort. This is the one I'm actually going to use, well certainly a short motor. The reason for that is that I had this one rebored 25 odd years ago, and it's fully rebored. The top of the deck has been planed and it has new bearings. So I could have used the 1949 motor, which according to the previous owner actually was running when he got the car. Now I'm keeping that. It's been all sealed up. I haven't actually broken any of the seals. When he took it off the road, he took the old oil out, put new oil in, lubricated the bores and then sealed everything up. So I've left it in that condition. That will stay with the car, so if anyone at some date in the future wants to put the original engine back in, they can do that. Now with this motor, as I said, I'm using it because it was rebored. It seems silly to waste it. So but when I'm putting it together, I'm actually using parts from a number of different sources. Now I have a few engines. I've got a 1951 engine which is not in good condition. In fact, the bores were seized. Now I've unseized that and pulled the components out, so what I'm doing is using the best components of two engines, that engine and this engine. Now I'm going to mix and match. For example, I'm going to use the cover plate here. This is off the 1951 engine. The cover plate off the engine, the 1950 engine, has actually got a crack in it, so this is better. I'm using Sump off the 1951 engine. It's aluminium cast, whereas the one on this engine was a steel pressed job. So as I say, I'm using composite parts. I'm just sorting out different parts on the table here. Got a camshaft, which is a good camshaft out of the 51. I'll look at the timing chains and see which are the best ones, cam followers. So I'll check everything out and use the best parts available to go into this motor. Now the head was checked when I got this motor done, and the engine reconditioner told me that everything was fine, so he pulled it apart, checked all the valves, relapped the valves, they were all fine. There was no wear in the valve guides, so that head will go on here, so it's ready to reassemble. As for the rocker gear, I'll look at the best rocker gear that I have. So at this stage, this is starting reassembly. I won't put it in the car until I've done the gearbox as well. Now, not sure what I'm doing with the gearbox. I have a number of gearboxes. I have the original 1949 gearbox, which once again was said to be working when the car was taken off the road, so that's probably the starting point. But I need to pull that out and check it to see if it's got any major wear in the bands and so on. But I'm not doing that just at the moment. I'll try and reassemble this, at least up to the full short motor stage. I'm not sure whether I'll put the head on here or once it's in the car, but I will be putting it in the car at certainly some stage, but perhaps not with the complete rebuild. I've still got to get the damper redone. It's not something that I will do. I have to send that away. There are very few places in Australia that can do that, but I have found one, so I'll need to organise that, so that's not a problem. Anyway, it's coming together, and hopefully it won't take too long to reassemble. Now I've been making gaskets for the engine. That's the front plate, or mounting plate for the engine. That's the gasket behind that. I haven't made the timing cover gasket yet, but I'll do that soon. This is the gasket for the rear crankshaft, rear of the crankshaft. That's the aluminium plate that covers the end of the crankshaft there. It's got oil grooves to push the oil back into the motor. But this is the main seal. I've just made that up. The engine block, for the first time in over 25 years, I've actually taken it off the engine stand. I was just explaining to my son-in-law that I thought the engine stands were made to build motors. Now he's a motor mechanic, and he said yes, well normally about 90% of the engine you can assemble on the engine stand. Well, unfortunately this you can't, because I had it mounted from the rear. I can't put the end plate on. Because I can't put the end plate on, I also can't put the actual flywheel on. And until I put the flywheel on, I actually can't turn the motor to set up the timing for the camshaft. So I've actually had to take it off, lower it down onto a board on top of the engine hoist, and I'll start to reassemble from the rear. I'll put the plate on, I'll put the seal plate on the back there, which is this one. Then I'll put the crankshaft on, which will enable, it's not the crankshaft, sorry, the flywheel, which will enable me to turn the crankshaft, and then I'll start assembling the front. So that's where I'm at. I'm just cleaning up the surfaces so I can put these gaskets on. I'll just clean it up with some wax and grease remover before I put the sealant on. So I'll continue with this process and so building it on the floor here. The motor's coming together nicely. It was necessary to put the flywheel on. I had to put that on so I could actually turn the motor, because I'm setting up the timing chain. Now I've managed to turn the motor to get number 1 cylinder on top dead centre. I've used the dial gauge to actually make sure it's in the right position, and check that with the position on the flywheel in through the inspection cover on the top there. So it's lining up with top dead centre. I'll peg the camshaft with this, just with a drill bit that goes through and into a corresponding hole in the mounting plate that holds the camshaft in. So that's in the right position. All I need now to do is to put the timing chain on. So that's all set up with the correct valve timing. So once I've done that, I'll put the timing cover on. I've made a gasket for that. And probably next I'll probably put the oil pump in and make sure I've got the gear in the right position on the camshaft, so the distributor's able to go in properly. So I've got to do that. And then I'll put the sump back on, bolt that back on. Haven't put the fluid flywheel on yet. I'm just looking at that, just cleaning it up. But it's getting, once I've got the sump on, I'll turn this motor in the right position up, and then probably assemble a few more things on the motor. Not sure whether I'll put the head on before it goes in the car. Maybe I will. I'll think about that a bit later on. But it's coming together nicely. Well, it's time to start putting the head back on. But before I do that, I've got to install the studs. Now, the studs on this side of the motor actually go into the waterway, so you really need to use a thread sealant. So I've got some sealant here. I'll put it on all the studs. These ones don't need it because they just go into the push rod opening there, but certainly these ones do go into the waterways. So I've cleaned the threads, and before I put these on too, I've actually run the nuts down on the top to make sure that they're all nice and loose and ready to be put on for the head. But at this stage I'll put the sealant on. I'll put the lid on. I haven't used this sort of sealant before. See what it comes out like. Oh, there it comes. Okay. Make sure I've got plenty on there. The last thing I want is the heads to leak around the studs. Some on the bottom. Now I'm told that to put the studs in, you really should be able to put them in by hand, basically finger tight. Now they say you don't have to lock them down with a double nut, but I need the double nut to actually grip it. Now it should go down and seat. Now it only has to be finger tight. You don't have to lock it down with a spanner. Just take the double nut off, and that's one done. So they're not hard to put in. Of course, if you don't clean things up, it might be a lot harder, but I've already run these into the holes to make sure that they're going to go in properly. Let's put another one in, just to show it wasn't a fluke. Okay, that's it, and I'll just go along and I'll do the rest of them. I won't video that, but I'll do them all on this side, and I might as well put the thread sealant in there. Won't do any harm. It's time to finally put the head back on the motor. It's been many years, 25 plus, since this has been on. The head has been serviced. New core plugs and so on were put in, so it should be fine. The block is ready to receive the head. I've cleaned that up. The studs are all in and all been sealed. The head gasket, what I'm doing with that is I'm applying a coat of copper gasket. I've used this on copper gaskets on other cars. It provides a better seal, but I've only ever used it on a copper gasket. The copper, it's like a copper spray paint. What it does is fills any imperfections in the block. So you apply a few light coats of this over the gasket, and it will just take up any minor imperfections. So some of these old blocks, when they're decked, they still have a few little marks and so on them. So this will help seal that. So I haven't had any trouble when I've used it, I have had trouble with copper gaskets when I haven't. I've actually blown new gaskets, so I now always put the copper gasket paint on it. So anyway, I'll do that. I'll just spray that, a couple of light coats. You wait until it's just tacky and then you put it on. So I'll do that now. Alright, the head's on. I've just torqued it down to 30 foot-pounds at this stage. The data I've got says it's between 26 and 41. Quite a range. I'll probably end up doing it at 35 at least, and then check it after the motor's been started. This stage I'm inclined just to leave it at 30, see if the gasket does compress. I mean, it's a copper gasket with insert in between the copper layers, so it will compress a little bit. So I'll come back tomorrow and just check it, see if it's still at 30 foot-pounds. So this stage that's on. Not putting the rocker gear on yet because I've got to look at refacing the rockers, so that's a separate task I'll have to look at. So this stage that's on. It's one less thing to trip over on the garage, making the motor even heavier. It's getting to the stage where I'll have to decide whether I drop it in the car before I put anything else on. So I probably won't put the manifolds on with it out of the car. I'll probably fit them to make sure everything's right, but it's probably easier without the clutter around the motor to lift it and manoeuvre it into the car. So this stage, that's on. Hopefully I'll never see it having to come off. I've decided to put the engine back in the vehicle, although I'm not going to actually lock up the engine and gearbox mounts. The reason I'm putting it in is that I've just run out of room in the garage. Working on two cars is just getting a little bit choked up in here, so what I'm trying to do is to actually get it in. The difficulty I've got, of course, is I can't move the car back because it hasn't got front wheels on, and I can't get the engine crane out of the garage with the engine on. So what I've got to do is to do it in stages. So I've managed to sit the engine on the chassis. I'll make sure that's not going to fall off. Probably just brace it on, and then I've got to move the engine stand out of the garage, reposition it so I actually come in under the chassis in the right direction. Then I can lower the motor in. So that's the next move. So hopefully the next little video will be the engine sitting back in the chassis for this car. So this is the first time in a long time. So anyway, that's just a bit of a progress report. Now, I spent the last 2 hours getting the motor in. As you saw last, I had it sideways on there. I had to move the engine crane outside. Need a couple of ramps so I can get it the right level. And getting it in, it's a bit like putting a tight shoe on. There's very little room. You snag up on the steering column here, obviously on the bulkhead, but it's gradually going in. Very slow process. I've had to lift the front of the motor to get the angle right, then adjust that on and off. So anyway, it's coming close to, there's the gearbox just about to slide in there, hopefully, if I can angle it right. And then I'm hoping I can just sit it on the mounts. As I said before, I'm not going to bolt it up yet. There's a few things I need to do, but I mean, I haven't put the prop shaft on yet, so I want to make sure I've got a little bit of movement in the motor. But this stage it's going in. I've had no major problems. As I said, very tight. You know, I'll have to lower it down a little bit there, or maybe lift the front of the motor to angle it down. So it's extremely tight. Luckily I haven't scratched anything yet, which is a bonus. I've come very close to scratching the bottom of that, but anyway, if that's the case, that's just unfortunate. But anyway, it's going in. Okay, the motor's now finally resting in place. It gives me a bit more room in the garage once I sort things out. Still got a few things to put on. I've got the damper. I've actually got to get that reconditioned, so I can't put the front of the car on until I've done that. So I'll work on the rocker gear. I might put the rocker gear on. I won't put anything else on because I'm probably going to have to lift the front of the motor just to get that pulley on. So I don't want it all cluttered around with things that are going to smash into everything else. So anyway, that's a good job done. One thing that's less to trip over in the garage. So what it also enables me now to do is that, seeing I've got weight in the front of the car, I can put these springs in. So I've been waiting for that. So anyway, that's done.